Has AI art finally gotten good enough to replace concept artists? Well, let's find out. There has been an explosion of AI art online recently, thanks to tools like DALL-E 2, Midjourney, and DALL-E Mini, or now Crayon. And people online have been talking about whether concept artists are a thing of the past. Some people say, for sure, AI art is there, and others say there's no way. AI is just never going to replace that human touch. But a lot of the people talking about it are not actually using or making concept art in their day-to-day life. So I wanted to put that idea to the test. I wanted to see if I could actually use this as concept art to make a tabletop miniature. So that's exactly what I did. I was recently granted beta access to both DALL-E 2 and Midjourney. These are two of the most advanced AI art generators that I have ever seen, or let alone used. And as a beginner tabletop miniature designer, I wanted to see if I could use that power to produce something interesting and cool. And, well, it worked. Kind of. Now, before I get into the actual sculpting and the process, I wanted to explain a little bit more about what AI art is, for those of you who have no idea what I'm talking about. Basically, these are giant neural networks, or many computers all linked together with shared code, that are fed hundreds, thousands of images, and taught how to take that information and put images together by themselves. So, if I want to see a photo of a cat astronaut in space, for example, I can just type that in and get a result. And the AI has learned what a photo is, what a cat is, what an astronaut is, and what space is. But it also has learned where a cat's head should go on a spacesuit, and how to make reflections on glass, and even where to add the shadows. And look, this one even has a suit shaped like a little cat. And this one's suit is just more fur. And this one just, well, has no suit. Actually, I think that would make a pretty cool album cover. Katrina and the Milky Ways. Anyway, so far all of those cat astronaut images have been generated using DALL-E 2, but each system handles this process a little bit differently. Taking that exact same prompt over to Midjourney yields, well, less than stellar results. Oh, sorry about that. But while Midjourney fails in accurate cat space exploration photography, it excels in style. Just look at these colors, different perspectives, shapes, compositions. Basically, while DALL-E 2 is very, very good at giving you an accurate image, Midjourney is just more weird and vibrant and creative, and much, much worse at making faces, or arms, or legs. Now, there is way too much to talk about here in this one video, but if you would like to see a full comparison between these two systems, and especially how that relates to concept art and miniature sculpting, then let me know down in the comments, and maybe I'll make a follow-up video. Anyway, back to the real question at hand. Can we use this art as concept art to make a miniature? Or is this just an insanely fast and easy way to generate cat memes, which admittedly are pretty cute? Well, during my first few days with Midjourney, I decided to give it a try. I have been slowly building up my pool of miniatures to use in my tabletop miniature game, Spire Seas, and I knew that for the next miniature, I wanted to include a female character. Specifically, I wanted to include a melee character that leaned a little more heavy into the sci-fi side of this setting. Also, looking at my paint rack full of paints, I really wanted to try using some of those more vibrant, expressive colors, which I tend to avoid when making a post-apocalyptic, traditional, grimy, grimdarky character. So I asked Midjourney for some advice. Imagine a post-apocalyptic sci-fi swordswoman in bright colors. Pretty simple, but to the point. And boom. Okay. Those are pretty cool, but wait, what's that? Is that her arm is the sword? I mean, I instantly fell in love with this idea. I mean, there's just no way that I would have come up with that on my own on the spot. But it fits so perfectly into the kind of aesthetic that I'm building for this game and this whole project. But it wasn't quite perfect. So I went through a few variations. Using these programs, you can choose one picture that you like after getting a set and have the program rerun that same process using slightly different information each time. So I started going through these variations, some of them better than others, and all of them with kind of messed up faces and weird arms, but eventually I landed on this one. It's got that slick arm blade, some well-designed armor, vibrant colors, and importantly, a face that's not as messed up as the others. And there we are. Concept art. Done. Right? Well, not quite. I had already run into the first problem with this whole process. It was really hard to see what anything was that I was looking at. Where does one armor plate stop and the other begin? Where does the armor itself stop and the clothing begin? Where are her legs? So I pulled the image into Clip Art Studio and got to work cleaning it up. I blocked out all of the major shapes and added a few lines here and there to make things clearer. Then went over the colors with a paintbrush, just simplifying them so that they were easier to see. Then, once I was done cleaning up that base image, I imported over some pictures of my base models from my last video and began sketching out a quick turnaround. I had to add in plenty of details on her right side and, well, her back, and of course, the legs. I also added a more detailed sketch of her arm and arm blade and a little more detail on the helmet, just to help myself out later in the process. Then finally, mostly for fun, but also to help me distinguish each individual part, I added a quick pass of color, using the same colors from the concept art, just copied over. Now, I'm not a great artist, but I think I did a okay job of maintaining the aesthetics and design from the concept art while still cleaning it up enough to work with. And I realized that my ability to draw faces is not that much better than Midjourney's. Then, with the drawing finished, I got to work on the 3D model. In Blender, I loaded up my female base mesh from the last video and began blocking out the clothing and the armor, all the while keeping my concept art as reference in the corner. Then I added in the skirt and a very basic version of the arm blade, and finished with the helmet and the hair. This was actually my first time making long hair on a model. My other characters have been mostly bald, like me, and it was kind of fun to test out a new method. I used Bezier curves to get the correct shape, and then I could take that, make it a mesh, and fill it in later. And it's not very detailed, but that detail probably wouldn't show up anyway on a 3D printer, so it works fine. After that, I began adding a little bit more detail, especially to the arm and the helmet, which I wanted to look a little more sci-fi and cybernetic, like in the concept art. Eventually, I realized that, unlike the concept art, I really wanted to put something in her offhand. In my game Spire Seas, every character's abilities are basically decided by what they're holding, so to have one weapon in one hand and nothing in the other hand is a little bit of a waste. So, to make her mechanically distinct from the other miniatures which I've made so far, which is one two-handed weapon and two one-handed melee weapons, I gave her a pistol, just to mix things up. The image I used here was also taken directly from Midjourney, so even that part had a base of AI concept art. For a simple object like this, I happened to get a pretty nice standalone quality image, so no sketchover needed. I just followed the basic outline with my mesh and then began adding levels and details to flesh it out. I didn't go nearly as into detail as the picture itself because I knew that 90% of it wouldn't show up on the printer anyway. So I just gave it a few little bits that would make it seem more sci-fi and interesting. And there was one last thing that I did a little differently this time. Because I was working with a base model which didn't have anything attached to it, I could then take the clothes and the armor and the weapons and everything and attach them to the rig directly. For my previous models, I posed everything and then built the details in place, but that meant that I couldn't repose the models after I'd finished working. So for this one, I spent a little extra time and got everything to follow the rig by itself so that I could make multiple poses. It took a little bit of time and effort to get everything working correctly, but once I did, I could pose her just like the image in the concept art. Standing proud, arm up, other arm down. But that's not a very dynamic pose, not something I want to see on the table, so I could also go back in and give her a second, more dynamic pose. Once I was happy with the pose, I merged everything together, checked for nice, clean, manifold geometry, and got her ready for printing. First, I imported the STL into Lychee Slicer to add all of my supports and the rafts, and then I took that finished STL and imported it over to Chitubox for the final slicing. You don't have to do this if you're making your own, I just happen to like the support system in Lychee and the slicing system in Chitubox. But you can do both in either, so it's up to you. After a couple hours, I got everything out of the printer, cleaned them up, and they turned out pretty nicely. The arm blade was pretty flimsy, but I just quickly went back and updated the STLs, so they shouldn't be so bad in the future. But while I waited for those updated models to print, along with my secondary pose, I got started painting. Now, this is only my third painted miniature, so I really couldn't match the concept art nearly as well as I'd hoped to. But I did get relatively close. First, I primed the whole model black. Then I worked my way up from the boots to the pants and skirt to the armor and shirt and belt, her arm and arm blade and helmet. And finally, a little bit of skin tone. I also decided to paint her pistol black so it matched the original concept art a little better. Finally, after putting a bit of color down on the base and a gentle wash over the whole thing, plus a half-failed attempt at dry brushing, I called it good. Let's see how my painting and sculpting compares to the AI concept art. Well, I have to admit it's not terrible, but I definitely could have done better with the painting. However, I do think that it's very clearly recognizable. If I held up a picture of this concept art and a lineup of minis, I think you could pretty quickly pick it out of the line. So we'll call that tabletop standard and leave it there for now. If you want to try painting this AI generated miniature yourself, then head over to MyMiniFactory.com, link in the description below, to get your own copy. It comes with 2 different poses, one standing stoic and one aiming, and each of those is both supported and unsupported. So you can ignore my admittedly unprofessional supports if you want to do them yourself. And if you end up printing it out and painting it up, then please let me know on Instagram or Twitter. I would love to see what a better painter could do with some of my miniatures. So, finally, is AI art ready to replace concept artists, especially for things like tabletop miniatures or video game art or anything like that? And the answer is, frankly, no. Not yet, anyway. The amount of work I had to put into fixing things and moving things around and generating new images is really not worth the effort for something like a larger studio. Plus, there's just no way to give feedback. If you like this hair color but don't like this armor, it's not an easy thing to just put them together. You would have to do that work by yourself. And, the faces aren't great. However, I do think that this is the first step in a massive shift in the way we approach art, both as creators and viewers. Just like Photoshop and, photography before that changed how we viewed art and the things that we valued, I think this is going to be doing the same thing over the next few years. Plus, for someone like me who is not an experienced artist, who is trying to make their own sci-fi universe or game or miniatures or whatever it is, this is going to be a massive help. Not for generating the concept art completely, but for providing the ideas and the iterations necessary to move from a basic concept to something usable. I can tell you right now, you will definitely be seeing more of these programs on my channel and probably other people's channels in the next few weeks or months or years. So stick around here on the channel if you want to see more of those projects and all the crazy ideas that AI and I can come up with. And follow me on Instagram or Twitter for more behind the scenes and up-to-date info. Well, that's it for today. Thank you for sticking around for this admittedly longer episode. I hope you enjoyed and maybe even learned something in the process. And I'll see you next time.